Hello there. Today I wanted to share a wine that I've found in my cellar that I feel I might have left there for too long. Having read various reviews, several suggest this probably should have been consumed by about 2016. The wine is from the Cornas appellation. It's from a producer called Jean-Luc Colombo, and it's his top wine. It's the cuvee Les Ruchets, and as you can see, that's from the 1998 vintage. So Jean-Luc Colombo is a leading producer and negociant in the Rhône Valley. Essentially, he's a modernizer who's been really quite influential in helping with the resurgence of Cornas as an appellation. And for several decades, he's acted as a consultant in the Rhône Valley and elsewhere in southern France. Jean-Luc Colombo has actually been quite a controversial figure in his time. Originally, he was a pharmacist. He came from Marseilles, got the wine bug, particularly loved Northern Rhone wines, and moved to Cornas in 1982. As a trained chemist, he began consulting to various local wineries, and subsequently some people have styled him as the sort of the Michel Rolland of the Northern Rhone. And the reason for this was that he steered his clients in the direction of producing wines that would have been attractive to the then very influential American wine consultant Robert Parker, encouraging the production of friendly, ripe, luscious, highly extracted wines with generous oak influence. His successes didn't go unnoticed, and in 1985, Robert Parker is supposed to have dubbed him as a revolutionary enologist. I guess more recently, Colombo's come from being seen as this sort of revolutionary figure and an arch modernizer, and although he remains controversial at times, today his approaches, including organics, do seem a lot more mainstream for this region. It was in 1996 that Colombo acquired his first vineyard, and that was Les Ruchets. And then in 1994, he and his wife Anne started a negociant business, producing wines from a variety of appellations throughout the Rhône Valley and southern France. As I say, the purchase of Les Ruchets was Colombo's first move into making his own wine. Les Ruchets, meaning the beehives, is a small plot of 2.2 hectares of old vines on a granite hillside overlooking the village of Cornas itself. Now, these are some of the oldest vines in the appellation. His first vintage was the 1997 vintage, and this rapidly established his reputation as a producer of Cornas. And this cuvee remains the estate's flagship wine. However, he does actually now have 3 other single vineyard Cornas cuvees: Les Terres Brûlées, La Louvière, and Vallon de l'Aigle. He also makes a raft of other regional wines from vineyard holdings he has, as well as the negociant business, which produces an even wider range of wines from the southern Rhone and southern France. Now, the Les Ruchets vineyard is described as facing the early morning sun, so it's southeast facing. They describe it as surrounded by juniper bushes and holm oak trees. Now, here the exceptionally old Syrah vines grow in terraces on typical Cornas granite soils, and the entire vineyard is a single plot on the steep Chaillot hillside at about 250 metres above sea level. It should also be noted that most of the vines in Les Ruchets are planted franc à pied, i.e. they're on their own rootstocks, something very rare, as most of the vines in the region will have been grafted onto American rootstocks as a result of phylloxera. Today, the average age of vines in Les Ruchets is about 90 years. It's probably somewhere between 60 and 70 years at the time Colombo purchased the estate, and probably about 70 or 80 years at the time this wine was produced. Today, Les Ruchets is described as being an organic wine. However, at the time this was made, the estate wasn't working with organic practices, although they may have been using the practice of covering the soils in mulch, which they do to try and limit erosion here in the granite soils. It wasn't until the early 2000s that Jean-Luc Colombo stopped pesticides and herbicides that he was spraying, with the estate finally gaining certification for organic viticulture through EcoCert in 2015. Now, Cornas, if you're not familiar with it, is a tiny appellation. It's only about 2 miles across, and there's something like 110 hectares of vines in total. It's at the southerly end of what's considered the Northern Rhone, so it gets a little more Mediterranean warming influence than some of its more northerly neighbours. And as a result, grapes ripen here probably a week or 2 before they do in those other appellations of the Northern Rhone. Now, the vineyards here are on steep slopes that rise quite dramatically up and west from the Rhone River on these ancient, friable granite soils. And the vineyards here are often described as an amphitheatre, and the shape of the hills is sufficient to provide a certain amount of shelter for the vines from the damaging Mistral winds that blow from the north. So Cornas's character is very much derived from this combination of aspect, altitude, and these lovely free-draining granite soils, enabling Syrah to get good ripeness, deep colour, and yet retain freshness that helps enable its structured wines to age gracefully. The 1988 vintage in the Northern Rhone is regarded as somewhat legendary. Severe April frost really reduced yields up to 50% some producers. However, after these frosts, there was an idyllic summer. It was warm and it was dry, giving the ability for grapes to fully ripen and for them to be harvested without any influence of rot. However, the extremely hot, dry summer included a heat spike in August, and that caused water stress in some vines, causing them to close down and stop ripening the grapes. And in some producers, that actually inhibited phenolic ripeness. So the vines weren't able to achieve full ripeness in their tannins. So some wines are left being described as having pinch tannins and quite high acidity, leaving to some wines, and I believe possibly the nature of this wine may be amongst those, that are lighter in weight and more cedary, with mature aromas of tobacco and dried cherries even when they were young. Just to talk quickly to the winemaking of this wine, obviously it's 100% Syrah. Everything was hand harvested, it was destemmed. Fermentation went on in temperature controlled stainless steel tanks, and post fermentation maceration lasted a month, presumably to try and draw the tannins from the wine and to achieve a full bodied wine. Aging then took place, and some notes I've seen suggest this was aged in 100% new oak, and that went on for somewhere in the region of 2 years, possibly 22 months. Notes I've seen on more recent vintages of Les Ruchets suggest that these days the use of new oak is more like about 15%. So that's obviously been toned back quite a lot in the intervening years. There's no note to say what size barrels were used. However, if you're using new oak, I see no reason why you wouldn't use a relatively small barrel, so probably 225 litre barriques. And as I think I've mentioned, I've seen a drinking window that suggests that this should have been consumed by 2016. So let's have a look at it and see what we make of it, shall we? Firstly, looking at the colour, this is a wine that I've had standing up for most of the day and I was hoping would have fallen clear, but actually it's still a little cloudy. The colour is a reddish colour, but it's only of medium intensity, and there does seem to be quite a distinct browning in the colour. Wine is labelled as having 13% alcohol and is quite readily forming tears on the side of the glass. So I am expecting that powerful tannins should be contributing to its viscosity here. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are of rich, mature red fruit, overlaid with savoury notes and a lot of those developed notes that I've mentioned, things like tobacco. There is quite a dried fruit, dried cherries, dried cranberries sort of nature to the red fruit. There are perhaps some cedary notes, some touches of spice, cinnamon, nutmeg. There's a rich, ripe, sort of plummy, almost prune-like nature to the fruit. And yet there are some slightly lifted, delicate red fruit, maybe raspberry notes. So let's have a taste. For a wine that I've been told will be less full and rich than is normally the case, that has quite a big, rounded, smooth, ripe structure. There are those sort of dried red cherry, dried cranberry notes, but behind that there's a rich, velvety, almost chocolatey nature to the tannin. It's a very complex one. You might describe hints of garrigue, rosemary. Certainly there's a rich, bitter licorice note sitting at the core of this ripe, rounded, powerful red fruit. There's peppery spice, as well as an underlying cedary hint, and classically for aged Syrah, there are some hints of bacon fat in there as well. I may not be making this sound very attractive, but actually, as a whole, I find it attractive, and it's exceeding what I've been led to expect from it. There's a good concentration in the wine, the alcohol is balanced, the acidity is balanced. I don't think it's standing out as sharp. I certainly wouldn't describe the wine as being overly acidic. There's a smooth, plush character to the wine resulting from its age. It's interesting that given the fact that they've pulled back from using quite so much new oak with this wine, I don't see the oak as particularly dominating. There's clearly an underlying cedar note, but the tannins aren't particularly drying. Fruit, maybe not as powerful as Les Ruchets normally produces, but nonetheless concentrated enough to make this quite a full-bodied wine. The structure is smooth, soft and velvety, but it's certainly present right across the middle of the tongue. I have to say, I think maybe there's a lesson here. When I pulled this out of the cellar and I saw what other people had to say about it, I was a little worried about what I might have to say about it. However, it's a wine with good power, good length, nice complexity. And while, had I have drunk this 10 years ago, it might have had a lot more fresh fruit, I'm actually really happy with the way it's tasting now. It seems to have aged successfully. For a wine that may not be one of the best wines from a legendary vintage, it seems to have aged quite successfully and is actually providing quite an impressive drink. Looking at the Wine Search aggregated critic score, this got 88 out of 100. I don't think it's hugely out of line. I'd probably put this at an 89 or a 90 myself. It may lack the firm rustic style of a traditional Cornas, but actually I'm quite enjoying the way that it's quite modern, high oak style has aged to give a reasonable amount of plush roundness. I think if you have any of this wine in your cellar, you probably want to drink it up fairly soon. But having looked at the comments of other critics, I did wonder whether I might regret keeping this wine this long. But no, I think I'm going to very much enjoy this. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. If you're watching these videos and you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, it would be fabulous if you consider doing that. It really does give us a boost to have more followers. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. And if you have any comments, either about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else related to that, please do put them in the comments box below. I'd really love to know what you think about what I'm doing. So I will leave a link to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this in the box below. So feel free to follow that, and you'll also be able to see the links to other vintages of Les Ruchets, and you'll be able to see pricing and where that's available. So thank you once again for joining me, and I do hope that maybe you'll make some time in the very near future and come and join me for some more video tastings. Until then, bye for now.